Okay, so in today's session, as a part of the Career Excellence Stand-Up, I want to talk mainly about how to not be a bad BA, right? How to not create a inefficient process, an inefficient system, how to make sure that you're doing the right things, especially when you get your first job and you're new in the role. How do you, we already have a series, by the way, about what to do in the first 60 days, but this is how to spot an inefficient process, an inefficient way of working, and maybe even an inefficient BA. Because sometimes if you get the job, there might be other people there before you who are working in the capacity of a BA, or sometimes they don't have a BA, you're the first BA they'll have. And if they've been doing something, as if the business has to function, they've been doing something all these years to work and to have the output that they want, it does not mean that thing is very efficient. They're just doing what they can to get something out. And so I want to spend the time to talk about how do you know you're in an inefficient system, inefficient process, inefficient way of working. And the sad part is when you first join, you're going to have the temptation to just do what everybody else is doing. And they're going to want to train you on how they're doing what they're doing today. And they don't realize that they're training you on how to be more efficient, more inefficient rather. So they're training you on what they're doing, but sometimes what they're doing isn't working. And they don't even know that, right? It's possible that they have created a system that's inefficient. This is the reason why they needed a BA in the first place, because everything is going haywire. And then when you join, the expectation is that you just fall in line and do what they've been doing. But the problem is if you do fall in line, you end up creating more inefficiency. But at the same time, because you're new, you can't just upend the whole thing. You just got there. Nobody's going to listen to you. So what I want to teach you here is how to spot the inefficiencies. And sometimes you may have to go along with it for the first couple of months while you're trying to learn. But I want you to be taking like mental notes of what's wrong with this process, so that when you get the chance, you can start making small incremental changes here and there, and eventually, hopefully, be able to make it better. And so when you have to deliver something, your thing that you do is efficient, even if you're working in an inefficient way. Do you understand? So remember that you can't change day one, and you're not going to have enough clout to convince everybody else that's been doing this before you join to change. That's probably not going to happen. But whatever you're assigned and whatever you have to deliver, it has to be of high quality. And sometimes they'll tell you, or they want to train you in how to do the thing that's wrong. Here's how we do our BRD. And then here's how we take from the BRD, and then we create user stories. And here's how we take these user stories, and then we put it in a sprint, right? And you're like, but hold on. Why are you creating user stories in Confluence, and then you're creating it in Jira, and then you're putting it in a sprint? You haven't discussed it yet. Like, why are we doing it this way? And sometimes even asking a question, depending on how new you are, might seem like it's an affront to what they're doing. So you got to be very careful how you navigate this. But let's first look at how do you know if you're in an inefficient process anyway when you get your first job. So one of the first things you'll notice when you're dealing with either a bad process or even sometimes personal, a bad BA, a person who doesn't know what they're doing, is there is typically a lot of confusion and contention. Wherever you have a team and things are just constantly, people just constantly butting heads, people just really, there's one thing about needing clarification and having a feedback loop, and there's another thing where there's just complete confusion. When you have teams that are confused as to what to build, that's a direct result of not having good business analysis done. When you have vague requirements, direct result of not having good business analysis done. When you have a constant stream of missed requirements that they keep pointing out, and it's been pointed out by developers after they get it. Oh, you know you have a bad BA right there because they're missing a lot of stuff. So vague and confusing requirements. When you write the specifications, whether it's a user story or a BRD, and it's ambiguous, it could be interpreted in different ways. That's not good. If you put a lot of assumptions in there, You're assuming the whole functionality. You're assuming we're going to build this, we're going to do that. And if that's true, then here's what the requirements are. That's wrong, because you can't assume something that needs to be built. You have to discuss that. You have to clarify that. You have to get alignment and sign off on that. You can't assume it's going to be done. So if you have a lot of assumptions about the functionality, if the documents that you create can be interpreted in different ways, it's ambiguous. And if you're missing key details, the devil is in the details always. If you write a user, we're going to do payments discussion this month. If you write a requirement that says when you make a payment, the system will check to make sure you're eligible, will make sure you have the right currency, and will make sure that the amount that you're trying to transfer is there in the account. Let's say you do that. Yeah, but what about the details of what kind of payment this is, right? What kind of currency? Is it a foreign currency to a regular currency that you have? What kind of, is it wire payment? Is it an internal payment? Those kind of details is what will cause you to get to the developers and they're like, okay, I don't know what I'm supposed to be building here. I'm confused. That's always a sign that the business analysis was not done. So as you get into the job and you ask to join these meetings, listen to what people complain about. Listen to the things that they're confused about. It's okay to say, I'm not clear as to exactly, do we want to have a button here? Or do we have a drop down here? I'm not clear as to how we're doing this. And we're in refinement about it. That's fine. But once something gets to sprint and they're supposed to be building it, and that's when they're like having all of this confusion, that's a clear sign we're missing something. Again, don't be opposed to change or opposed to people pointing out. You're not going to get every single thing, but it shouldn't be a constant thing in your team that they're constantly having to figure out what they're building. It should be an anomaly, odd, one-off, but not the norm. The other thing is lack of active listening. There are BAs that when you're talking, they're quiet, but they're not listening. They're waiting for their chance to speak. And they don't really hear what the stakeholders are saying. And they just like to document. So I'm kind of guilty of this too. When you're talking to me, I'm writing down. And I'm using my pen and paper, right? Because I like to write. I really do. I like to have notes because it's something that I do at the end of the day. I go back through my notes to see if I missed anything. And because when I'm writing physically, I feel like I go faster than typing. When I'm typing, I'm doing a lot of things. My hands on the keyboard, I'm doing it, even though I do it very fast. I'm in a device screen. I feel like it distracts from just listening and being a part of the conversation. So I'd rather take my little scribble notes, and then at the end of the day, I can convert that to whatever documents I need to convert it to. But you definitely want to listen. Listen and try to understand. I have heard this said in meetings with other BAs, and I am blown away. Like, why would you even say that? I've heard BAs, seasoned BAs, lead BAs, principal BAs will be in a discussion with a stakeholder and say, I don't understand. I'm confused. I'm not clear. You can say that, but you will have to listen first, right? And the declaration that you're confused doesn't help with the conversation, right? So in other words, the way that was said, it's not like you can't say the words, I'm confused. You could say that if you're truly confused, but the way it was said was preemptive to the person explaining properly. And it felt like they were just trying to get to this point, but the stakeholder was explaining the whole thing, the entire flow, and just listen, just wait, just listen. Oh my God, I got my screen locked. Can you guys still hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So they were just waiting, and they were just like interrupting the stakeholder in the story because they wanted to get just this one pointed answer. So you gotta be, sometimes you need to curb the stakeholder and have them tell you what you want, but sometimes you gotta let them just explain it, because they will get to a point where what you are confused about would be answered if you understand the flow end to end. So it's a fine line, I agree, but active listening is very important, and not just being quiet until it's your turn, right? Fail to tailor your communication. So this is a thing that happens to a lot of new BAs, and I want to warn you against that. Because you're new to the field and you're going to be in different meetings at different levels, sometimes what the BA fails to do is know when to get deep and when to just give a high level. So you're not tailoring your communication to your audience. So when I'm in like a Scrum of Scrum, we talked about this one. If you guys want to go back and watch a video about scaled agile, if you're in a Scrum of Scrum, which is a bigger meeting with all the different Scrum Masters, or you're talking to the project lead or the project manager, or you guys are in a session in determining the high level requirements, then you need to pull your conversation up a notch, right? They don't want to hear about the intricate acceptance criteria of one of your stories at that point. They want to hear about the overall picture. Are these requirements doable? Did we get some estimates that said these are, going to take more time? Is this thing in scope or not in scope? So you really want to bring the conversation up a little bit to a higher level that they can see the big picture and you can help them be informed about how this impacts something else. For example, I'm working right now on this concept of an approval rule, which is I'm saying when I'm making a payment, all of these payments have to be approved by at least one person. That's what we call in our world an approval rule. This is commercial banking. So we want to make sure that nobody can unassign that rule, that it's always in place. That the bank wants to make sure all of their clients must have this rule in place and they can't just go into the system and remove it. So we need to allow them to disable the option to unassign the rule, right? So because of that, there's some additional complexity with the different types of payments. Like there's something that is going to impact wire transfers, but doesn't impact, let's say, international transfers, for example, right? So there's some nuances there. When I go to the meeting, I'm not going to talk about, we want to show the trash can disabled and the unassigned button disabled and they don't care about that detail. What I need to talk about is that we have a requirement to disable unassigned, and there's an impact on whether or not we can deliver our wire transfer requirements because of this, right? Like that's all they care about. They don't need to know, whether it's disabled or not disabled and whether you can click on it and see the link or not. They don't, it's just, most of the time they don't want to get to that level at first. If they want more, they can drill down. But if I go into a meeting with developers, you betcha I got to tell them all the details. I got to say, when you click this button, what we want is to no longer see this option enabled, whether it's from this click or whether it's from just a screen list. I don't want to see the trash can. I don't want to be able to click on the more button and see the option, blah, blah, blah. We have to change this in the API call. We have to whatever. It's a front end change versus a back end change. So you as a BA, if you cannot boil up what you're talking about so you can serve it up to leadership, you're going to have poor communication because you get too deep in the details too fast and they're not there with you, right? So you have to be able to speak at different levels, whether it's at a leadership level or it's at a developer level. You also know you're in a bad environment because you don't clarify and you don't confirm. You talk to the project manager, they say this is what we want to do, and you run off to write user stories and BRD right away. You don't ask questions. You don't look into it to say, but if you do this, how is that going to affect all of these other things? Because you should be helping them to think through all the details. A lot of times when you get the first job, you're so anxious to please that you just like, okay, we need to write user stories. Okay, let me go write user stories. We need BRD, let's go write BRD. You are not a scribe. This is why you must spend time to learn the product and the feature. I just got assigned to a project, for example, and they were asking me today, I wasn't there yesterday because I was spending some time yesterday planning my package that I'm sending back to Jamaica. So when I come in today, they're like, okay, Karaleise, we need a timeline for when you're going to have all the requirements done for this thing. We need to make that up. I need to add that to our list. Project managers exist, I believe, for one reason, to update their project plan. That's all they exist to do. So they will pressure you immensely to get some random dates. I mean, I don't even know what we're building. I don't know what this thing is about. I've not had time to absorb anything. Nobody's introduced me to anything. But the first question is, what is the deadline? When is the time when you have this requirement ready? So you as a BA will always face this challenge, and it is for you to know how to push back. So you need to be able to say, my first step would be to look at the documentation that we have on Confluence about this. I've already scheduled a meeting with the SA, the software architect, to go through what we've built on the website so I can make sure we have the same thing on the mobile side. I'm going to meet with you on Thursday to give you an update, but I cannot give you a time until I've done these things, and I'll let you know by the end of the week, right? So something like that. Don't be intimidated by people who are in higher positions than you, trying to push you to give them a date to put on their plan. If they want a date and they keep pushing, okay, give them an arbitrary date 2 weeks from now. Sometimes they might, oh, that's so long. Okay, give them a week. But it's a draft. I can give you a draft by then. So nobody can hold you accountable, right? So you have to know how to push back. Now, other things that would help you know that you're in a inefficient environment, or you work with a BA is not very competent, is when that they forced you, or they're trying to focus on what we're doing all the time instead of why. Sometimes you need to understand the why behind it, right? Our job as BAs is to focus on the what, not the how. But to get to the what, you need to ask why. So that's why you have things like the 5 whys, right? So you need to capture the request, but you have to dig deeper and you have to understand the root cause. Why do we do this? Why are we doing this? What's the benefit? How are we helping our customers, our clients, our internal staff when we do this stuff? So that's also a part of asking the right questions. Because of time, I'm going to jump through some of these. Another big thing is when you cannot prioritize properly. So you're going to lean on the product owner to help you prioritize. You don't just work on random things. You work on the things that they care about in the order that they've told you. But if you, within your realm of what you need to do, you have to prioritize your own tasks also. So even to get to the requirements, you have tasks that you have to do. You have to schedule meetings, you have to review documents, you have to all these things. You need to be able to prioritize your own tasks to lead to the end result that you want. And remember, sometimes you get the first job and you're a BA, but they have you being pulled in to work as a Scrum Master sometimes. Sometimes you're pulled into QA activity, and then you still have to be a BA. I want you to remember why you're hired. What does your main job function say? Business analyst. So while you do the business analysis, you prioritize the business analysis first, and then you do the other tasks, maybe based on urgency. But if it's something that you have to drop what you're doing to do something else, you gotta let them know, hey, I have these requirements, but I'm going to stop those because I got to go help you test. But just so you know, that's going to make a little bit of a delay on delivering these requirements. And if they accept that, fine. But you have to focus them on what's priority for you, right? And you can't let people, when you're new, you're at the disposal of whoever's there before you. They can say, oh, new person, this has happened to me. New person's in, I'm going to take all my job and try to shift over to that person. Because you're new, you have no idea what you're supposed to be doing. So I've had situations where, as I'm new, I end up doing a whole other role because they started giving me all the jobs that they're supposed to do. And then I caught on to them like, oh, hold on, back up a little bit. I'm doing business analysis. I'm not a project manager. Right? Why am I managing budgets? Why am I having discussions about resource allocation? So you kind of you have to be very diplomatic, of course. You wouldn't say no, but you'd be like, okay, I'm going to work on this, and this, and then we're going to get to that. And because I need to deliver these things, you have to prioritize what you're there for, because at the end of the day, you can help other people with their job. They cannot help you with your job. You got to be very, very focused on that in a very professional, nice way. All right. The other way, in a bad environment or you're working with a bad BA is they don't really validate the feasibility of things. They haven't spent time cross-checking and confirming. They just write stuff and throw it over the wall. Let's see what else is here. The worst environment, and luckily I haven't had much of this, but you can have this, is when you have BAs that start blaming others and talk about that's not my job. Or, I just do documentation. I'm just here to do this part of the job, and this other part is not mine. No, it's not your job. We get that. And you shouldn't be saying it like that anyway in a professional environment, because you want to seem like you're part of the team. You're a team player. You're jumping in where you can. One of the things that I've done And it's kind of a testament to how I can do things that has helped me when I start new projects. Because when I start new projects, sometimes they don't know me from Adams, right? They don't know what I can do. They don't know if I'm even competent. I'm just another face that shows up on the meetings. What I'll do is when I see them squabbling about stuff, sometimes I immediately see the problems. I'm like, oh, so we write in BRDs over here, and then the developers don't have access. Sometimes as simple as they don't have enough access, they don't have the right meeting set up, they don't have the right communication, they don't have, like for example, just today in one of the calls that I joined for the new project I'm on, one of the developers was saying that he uncovered something that's missing from the requirement, and he wanted to know how we handle those things. And I listened in because this is my first stand up with them. I don't want to jump in and start telling them what to do. So the answer to the question was, oh, well, let the project manager know, and that person would add it to their list of discussion points. And in my head, I'm like, why would we do that? That's not the best thing to do. What we need to have is a change log, because what happened was the thing he found, the reason why it was an issue is because the web doesn't do it and the web missed it. So when the mobile guys came in to match the web, they missed it too because it was never in the web in the first place. So it's missing everywhere, right? That is a change. That's something that was never incorporated in the scope. It needs to be a change request. So it doesn't need to fall in a conversation and fall through the cracks somewhere. It needs to be documented as this is a change that we'll now have to go add to the web and then therefore wait for the web to be done before we can do it to the mobile. But imagine having so many of those different things. No wonder the project is like, people are confused because all of these things are just being talked about in a stand-up and that's it. So being able to, see a thumbs up there. Thank you for that thumbs up. So being able to work with people who, one, know what the best processes, the best approaches are, and not be willing to blame others, right? You should act like a team player. So what I do when I have situations like that, where I have teams that are not coherent and not working together, I jump in and I offer to do the most difficult thing everybody's try not to do, right? It's too much work. Somebody was saying, oh, we don't have high-level estimates. And they're like, well, I'm working on this, I'm working on that. Between all of us, we're doing all these things. But one BA said, I'll try to find some time to do this and do that. And I jumped in and said, I can do it. I'll do it for you. No worries. So when you get to a certain level where you feel confident of what you're doing, take on the difficult tasks. Take on the difficult tasks and then do them well. And when you do the most difficult thing that everybody's like dreading, you do it well, you communicate well. The ripple effect is so great. It makes everything go smoother. People know where to find things. They have the clarity they need, and then you get the goodwill, I guess, from having been the one to help the team with a big problem. And it always works. The trick to that is you have to know what you're doing to get that. So it takes a little bit of experience to do that. But take on difficult tasks. Don't be afraid of that. And then the other thing, I guess to close out, we're a little bit over time, that you'd want to not do, because this is what bad BAs do, is they really don't have a good sense of not the approaches, but it's like they would focus a lot on the things that don't matter. It's like the output, the focus of them is to have an output in the documentation they provide. And a lot of times when you find a BA that's not working well, or a process that's not working well, or a group that's not working coherently, they tend to have waterfall mindset. And I'm sorry, I don't want to down on waterfall, but it's true. They tend to have a lot of waterfall mindset, even when they're working with agile tools. So they'll use Jira, they'll use Confluence, but they're doing it in the most waterfall way possible. And it's difficult to get them to adjust because they don't see the value of agile, and they're very, very resistant to change. So when a requirement changes, they blow up because we talked about this. We talked about this yesterday. We talked about it the week before. So for you to be a good BA, you have to be embracing change. It's going to change. It's going to change. The requirements, the stakeholders are going to have new information. They're going to say they want one thing, and then 2 weeks later, they come back with something different, or they add something new to it, and the scope keeps growing. It is your job to manage a change. That's why you have a job. In fact, when I have change, I'm happy because I have more things to do. more value to prove, more reason why you need to hire me and keep me hired. Okay? So the change is coming. Being adverse to the change, and it's a bother because you have to go change your documentation now, you gotta go review stuff. That's your job. That's why you're here. Should be delighted. Right? Change your attitude to change. That's one of the best advice I can give you for being a BA or being a good BA, because it is going to change. How you approach it, how you discuss it, how the attitude you show towards it can make it a pleasant thing or an unpleasant thing. And most of the time, if you're in an inefficient process, people are very, very adverse to change. And they're very focused on their document. They want the document to be perfect. They want their Excel sheet to be easy to follow, and they want to sort and make sure it's nice and neat. But they're not focused on getting the output, which is the software that should be working. It's great if your Excel is beautiful and if you have a wonderful BRD, that's great. But does that help the development team build what you need? So when you're in a bad environment, they focus on the wrong thing. They focus on having things documented so they can prove that they did the work. No, the proof of doing the work is the working software that's working well without bugs. Right? So that's what it is. So it's a shift in mindset. I'm out of time, so I'm going to stop here for now.